Welcome to this video. We're going to be installing OpenShift 4.6 on Azure with restricted permissions and no public access to the internet. In other words, you won't be able to ingress into the environment. It's going to be a private environment. Networking for egressing from the cluster has been configured via NAT gateway so that the nodes can go and download their files, but direct access into the environment is not going to be permitted. Everything's going to be private IP addresses, and in order to do that, we have a Bastion host, and I'll go over the environment here in a minute. But we have a Bastion host also installed in the environment that we will be using to install and run all the commands. So let's go over the environment we're going to be working with today. I've got a few resource groups here. Red Hat OCP001, this holds the shifting red domain. This is not required for this private install, but if you're going to be generating the install config from the command line, it will require that you have a resource group with the domain in there. It could be faked. It doesn't matter. It's just going to look for a resource group that holds the domain zone. It's better when you're doing this private install just to customize your own install config, and I'll put an example config together for you as well, so you can just download that. Okay, so we have a couple of real resource groups that our objects are going to be installed in. The first one here is OCP cluster resource group, and this is where our install of our cluster will be. We've got a couple of objects already in here. One is the user managed identity. This identity only has privileges as a contributor role in this resource group. And we've also pre-allocated our private domain. OpenShift.ShiftingRed is the cluster name is OpenShift, and ShiftingRed is the domain that we're going to be installing. And I went ahead and put it into this resource group so that all the nodes, when they come up, they can just reference that. And we've also got references to the API int, and asterisk.apps that'll get registered into this so that our Bastion hosts that we're using will be able to access those URLs. And then, of course, we have our storage account that we pre-created here, and this will contain the containers for our bootstrap file and our image that we'll be using to clone all the VMs. Okay, so I also have a network resource group, and this one holds, like I said, the Bastion host. It holds our NAT gateway, our public IP address that we use to get to our Bastion host, and of course this VNet. The VNet has two subnets in it, and one's for the master nodes and one's for the worker nodes. Okay, now as far as permissions go, on the VNet itself, we'll select that. The only permissions that are on here is the OpenShift service principal that I created has network contributor only to the VNet. There's no other permissions for the service principal here. If we look at our other resource group, we will see that the managed identity and the service principal both have contributor rights to this resource group. No other permissions have been allocated. Now that means that, again, just to remind you, elevated permissions will be required to A, create the service principal, B, create the OpenShift identity, and then of course we're going to also need to link this private zone to our VNet. And I haven't done that yet, so I'm just going to show you that, and we're going to create a virtual link. We're going to add it, and we'll say OpenShift network link, and we will bind it to that VNet and click OK. So you'll need elevated permissions in order to do that. All right, now there's some tools that we're going to need to install on our Bastion host. The first thing is we need to get our Linux installer. I'll put a link to cloud.redhat.com so you can download that. So let's just go ahead and grab that. We'll also need our pull secret. I already have that. And we need our command line tools. Copy link. Grab that. We're also going to need the Azure CLI. This is a Ubuntu box that I'm using as a Bastion host just because it pops up first when I go to Azure. And we will run that install. And we're also going to need JQ. JQ is leveraged by some of the scripts. Some package managers and repositories already have JQ available. You just do yum install JQ or apt-get install JQ and install it. This node doesn't, so I'm just going to grab the binary, clear, and then we'll copy that binary. Make it executable, and then move it to user local bin. I forgot to change the name, so it's there we go. Okay, now let's go ahead and extract our OpenShift. So let's do install C user local bin. Okay. All right, so now we got our tools installed. We can come back over here. All right, now, one thing that I've done in this directory here, I will give you guys access to this file too. If you look at this, it's just a template that I created just so that you can manually create your install config file. So you'll see that there's options here you have to fill in, base domain, your cluster name, and then your the things you are required for Azure. Now, a couple of the options that I've done here is outbound networking type is user-defined routing, and this again makes it so that it's private because it's you're responsible for creating all the routing. So all the nodes again have access a NAT gateway to access the internet. There's no inbound routing to these nodes, and then of course I'm publishing everything internal. I'll show you this too. What this is going to do is it's going to create API int and the asterisk.apps wildcard into this DNS zone. If you don't want it to do that, you want to control that yourself, that's fine. We can go into the manifest file and delete where it says the private zone, and then it won't add those records into this DNS. You will then be responsible to create those records. Because I'm only adding 3 records and it is a private install, I'm not allowing it to do it, but that is optional for you. And then if you don't want to use wildcards, you can run something like after the install, just do like a OC get routes, all namespaces, do something like that. And it'll pull up all the routes that are default installed and just add those to your private DNS zone, and that should be fine for you to gain access to it. Okay, so I will again make this template file available for you. I've already gone into, let me remove that. Okay, clear, and then I've already gone into my OpenShift directory here, and I've created one for this environment, this one right here. So we're going to be using that one. All right. Clear. Okay, pull it over. I've created an environment variable list here so that it has all the environment variables that I will be using for the installation, including the location of the install config files, my auth, my private key, the identity name, my storage SA, all the networking. And let me kind of highlight these two here. So it's going to bring up a load balancer into this resource group. One IP address, this one here, will be used for app and app internal. And so this will be the ingress point for the load balancer. And then for the wildcard apps, it will use this IP address. So you need to make sure you put these in because it will use those as parameters. So I'm going to grab this and put that in here. Okay, so we have our environment variable set. And now we just need to, I think I got all the prereqs I needed done. All right, so now we just need to go ahead and start the install. And again, we don't need to create the install config file. So our first step, clear, is actually to create the manifest. And this will prompt us to log into Azure as well and store that service principal account. So our Azure subscription, paste that, our tenant ID, copy, paste that, our service principal, client ID, copy, paste that, our service principal password, copy, paste that. Okay, so now it's created all of our manifest files. And let me show you again, if we go to VI, OpenShift manifest, and there's a DNS one, this one here. And so here's that private zone. So if you don't want it to write in the records into this zone here, just delete this, this whole section right here, all right? Okay. Now, we need to do a quick backup. I like to back up the one of the worker machine sets. That way you can use that to create a machine set in Azure once you're done, or in your cluster. And then we need to edit the ingress controller. And I'm doing this because, again, it's a private install. So we'll edit that, and we'll come down here to where it says load balancer, and we'll say host network. And I like, because I'm going to be setting up 3 nodes anyway. We'll say replicas 3, and we'll make a replica across each one of them. Now there's some, the reasons why we're doing host network for my script is it's going to, well, it's easy. So essentially every one of the hosts is going to bring up 3 replicas. So if you have 3 hosts, it'll assign port 80, port 443 to the host, and I'm going to be ingressing directly to those ports on the load balancer. Now, the other option to do is node port service, and then you can specify the ports that you want those nodes to be opened up on. If you're going to do node port, make sure that you modify my JSON script for the infrastructure so that you also reference those ports instead of the ports 80 and 443 that I have in there. Okay, so we got that done. And now we need to remove the machine sets themselves because we're not going to be using those. We're going to be generating those from our ARM templates. And then let's export our infrastructure ID. We'll use that as well as a reference. So let's echo that. Make sure I got it. I do. And then the next thing is to create our install, or rather our ignition files. Great. Okay, now we will need to log into Azure with using our service principal from this point on. So let's go ahead and put that in. Login. Actually, I'm going to clear this to make it a little easier for you to see. Easy login. And grab my ID. Password. Tenant ID. Okay, so we're logged in there. Okay, so I transferred the JSON files up to the Bastion host. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the infrastructure. So we'll just paste that in. Again, I'm using the environment variables here to run that. This will take a few minutes. And this process will create those load balancers and then add those to the network so that they'll have their IP addresses assigned to them. Okay, that's done. Let's refresh over here. We should see a load balancer. Yep, right there. And if we go into it, we'll see our 2 IP addresses that we have assigned, and our load balancing rules have already been pre-configured for us. So everything's ready to go there. Okay, clear. Now let's grab our storage account key. We'll export that. Grab the URL. Create our VHD container. And we will transfer our VHD image into that container. And this will take a minute. So there's a while loop that's provided as well. So you can run that and wait for it to finish. So once it says success at the end, we'll be ready to continue with our steps. Okay, so that is a success. So let's go ahead and create our storage container for our Bootstrap ignition file. And then we will copy the ignition file into that container. And let's also export our image so we can use it to clone. And let's refresh over here. All right, let me clear the screen. And now let's deploy the image. Copy, paste. So it's going to create a pardon me, image reference over here. There we go. So now we should be able to see an image right there. Okay, clear. And let's export our info for bootstrapping. Add the bootstrap, export the encoded value, and then we'll run the AZ deployment for our bootstrap node. Okay, clear. Now we show all those resources over here. And we do. There's our bootstrap. And now we can move forward with our master node. So let's export that encoded value. And then again, using our environment variables, run the AZ command. This will build the masters. Okay, masters have been created, and we can go over here and hit refresh, and sure enough, they're there. And it's also added the bootstrap node and the managers to our backend pool. You can see them all right here. So that's great. All right, so we just have to wait for bootstrapping to complete. And to get that, let's clear the screen. We'll just run this. So we're going to wait for bootstrapping to complete. Usually this takes, on Azure, I've seen it take between 6 and 10 minutes. So our API is up. So this is where it's referenced that entry into our private DNS. So if we go to here, we should see our DNS zones have been created, our DNS records rather. So API.OpenShift.shifting red, it knows that it's there. My Bastion host can resolve it, so it's able to find it. And we just have to wait for bootstrapping to finish up, and then we can proceed with the worker nodes. Okay, looks like that finished. Took about 6 minutes. That's pretty good. All right, now let's go ahead and create our workers. So we'll export the encoded ignition file, and then we'll deploy the workers. Okay, it's clear. And we should have, we'll refresh here, we should have our workers, sure enough. And if we go back to our load balancer, we'll see the backend pools, and now we've got the worker nodes underneath the apps. So that's great. Go back here. Okay, so I can't remember if I exported my kube configs. Let's do that. And now we can do OC get nodes, and we should see three manager nodes. Yep, we do. And then we could do OC get CSR. We have to approve the certificate signing request for the workers manually. Grep pending. Grep pending. And I'll give it a couple of minutes, but we should see 3 certs. We'll approve them. Give it a couple seconds. We should see another 3 certs, approve those, and then the worker nodes will start joining into the cluster. And then we just have to monitor our cluster operators. And once those are up, we should be ready to go. Clear. Okay, got our 3 pending certificate requests there. So we should have here. So we go OC ADM certificate, approve. We'll put in these 3 certificate requests. Great. OC get CSR. Again, we should see another 3. Those are all approved. OC get CSR rep pending. There's 2 of them. And there's 3. OC get, OC ADM certificate, approve, and we'll put those in. Like that, and OC get nodes, and we'll see 3 workers. Yep, so those will start coming online. OC get nodes. Watch OC get nodes. One of the workers is ready. Okay, so the worker nodes are done. And we can do, let's see, clear and OC get CO. So we look at the operators. We can see that all the operators are still firing up. Whoops, sorry about that. And the worker nodes were required for a lot of these, so we can just do watch. Well, actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and clear out all the Bootstrap resources because we don't need those anymore. So we'll just paste all these in. Okay, now we can check out the status of the operators. OC get CO. We're almost done. We just got the kube API server. This sometimes takes an extra minute. And then as soon as that's done, all the auth will pop up. OC get CO. All right, so let's just watch that. OC get CO. And so we're waiting on this one to pop in, and then that one will be done. And then we're ready to go. Okay, all the operators are up now. Let's go ahead and we'll cancel this. OC get route all namespaces. There. So if you want to put in all those manual DNS entries into your private zone, instead of using apps, here's all the wildcard entries that you would use in its place. I went ahead and put console into my local host file so I can get to it, and then I put in a route into the cluster just so we can show you that the console is available. So let's go there, do HTTPS console, and so that's up. Visit the website, yes. Yes. It's gonna pop up one more time. Show details, visit the website, yes. I really mean it. There we go. All right, so let's cat OpenShift auth kube admin password. We'll grab this, copy group admin password and log in. This should get us logged into our new private cluster. There we go, on Azure. So that's it, beginning to end. A little bit of custom JSON files. I'll make everything available for you to modify it at your leisure. And yeah, so I hope this was helpful on getting OpenShift installed in Azure in a private environment. Thanks a lot.